Now let's start talking about the yellow hat. The yellow color stands for sunshine and optimism, and it's the opposite of the black hat. It's all about finding positivity. Wearing the yellow hat, we ask two main questions. Number one, what value can we see? And number two, how can we create this value? So for example, you could say, people now care more about the health benefits of the foods that they eat. Put on your yellow hat and tell me what you see. Or, wearing my yellow hat, I sense that with the recent market downturn, there's a lot of locations that we could purchase at really good prices. What are the main benefits of using the yellow hats? De Bono identifies three of them. And the first one is to actually see more benefit. We have a natural tendency to see benefit in our own ideas or in situations that we already like. With the yellow hat, we don't have to wait for that, and we can see benefit in ideas that other people bring forward or in situations that at first glance might feel very negative. Second is that we are more open to finding opportunities. With the yellow hat, any situation, whether good or bad, we can put it on and we can try to see what benefit could be extracted from that situation, what new opportunity we could go after. And number three, it's also a very constructive hat. It's constructive thinking. It's about making things happen, about what are ways to get to the solution, to get to the value. And it's very important to note that opposed to the red hat, the yellow hat has to be supported by logic and reason, right? If you just have a hunch about something, it's better to wear the yellow hat, the red hat, to make it very clear that that's a hunch. But if you have facts and reasons to support your claims, then it's fine, it's perfectly fine to wear the yellow hat while doing that. So for example, when you're doing a SWOT analysis, when you look at the opportunity section of your quadrant, that is also very similar or the same thinking mode as you're doing when you're using the yellow hat. So how far into dreamland should you be able to go with your yellow hat ideas? When is something just foolish, and when is it a grand vision that can inspire us to take actions? In order to look at that, let's look at two examples that can make this clear. The first scenario would be to say, let's buy lottery tickets and hope to win. That's just foolish. The second scenario was maybe like when John F. Kennedy inspired us to go to the moon within a decade, when he gave that famous speech at Rice University in Texas. And going to the moon, putting a man on the moon was a very improbable thing to do, but there was a way to get there. It was not physically impossible. And that was very strong speculative yellow hat thinking, but then with more and more yellow hat thinking, people at NASA and engineers all around the US figured out a way to actually go to the moon, put a man on the moon. It's good practice to be aware of the probabilities of the scenarios you're laying out. And because we all interpret words a little bit differently, it's best to use numbers when making these predictions. So you could say there's a 15% chance that our vegan burger patty gets chosen as the burger patty of the year. We should be ready with follow-up PR activities. It may not happen, but in any case, we should be ready. So let's talk about reasons and logical support for a minute. What is the positive view based upon? A positive assessment can be based on experience, the available information, trends, guesses and hopes, and so forth. The yellow hat thinker should always lay out those reasons. She should give as much evidence for her assessment as possible. If it's just a mere hunch, she might as well be using the red hat. Having said that, it's still important that we can use the yellow hat in a speculative manner. A lot of value can be created if we're allowed to think far into the future and to think of big visions and things like that. So try to use facts and figures and things you know, but don't be afraid to go in a speculative mode of action. Now let's talk about the different sort of stages at which the yellow hat can be used, right? So we can use the yellow hat to put forward an initial idea, a proposal. It's really an unfleshed, it's just a thought. It could be like, well, what if we went to the moon, right? Then there is also the yellow hat in the assessment mode where we're saying, well, here's the proposal from NASA. Here's how we're going to go to the moon. Here's all the rockets we're going to build. Here's all the money that needs to be invested. Here's the timeline and so forth. And then we can use the yellow hat and the black hat to do an assessment. So now we're in the assessment phase. We look at all the benefits that could come and we look at all the dangers. In fact, there's also a third way to use the yellow hat, which is sort of in the middle, where it's between just the idea phase and the assessment phase, and Bono calls that the construction phase, where we're taking an initial idea and sort of fleshing it out together with the black hat to make it into a final plan that can be put forward for the final assessment. So let's look at an example. I might say, how could we reduce greenhouse gases? Let's have a yellow hat brainstorm on that. Michael, why don't you start? And Michael might go and say, well, how about we turn everybody vegan? That would massively reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. You might also say, well, we could also try to find more plant-based protein sources, and then people wouldn't have to change their diet as much, and they would still reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from the foods that they're eating. And you could say, we could also have a meat tax that would make the alternative protein sources more attractive, basically overnight, and also lead to a reduction of greenhouse gases. You can see how each of these three suggestions are very concrete. We can now use the constructive mode using black and yellow hat to further flesh them out before putting them into a final assessment. So for example, on the meat tax, you might counter and say, well, people are very used to the way they're eating meat. They don't want to pay more money for the food they consume. That would be very hard to pass a law or pass a vote that the public would accept. You might say, well, what if we started with a beef tax? Beef is by far the worst offender in terms of greenhouse gases, and people don't eat beef every day, right? So that might be easier to pass a law that just taxes beef. Right? And so we can use the black and the yellow hat to further sort of refine our proposals before we give them a final assessment. So let's summarize what we've learned with the yellow hat. With the yellow hat, we asked the two questions of what value can we see and how can we go about creating this value. The three main benefits of using the yellow hats are seeing more benefits, finding opportunities, and finding solutions to obstacles that are in our way. We've also looked at how we should use probabilities when assessing solutions. Yellow hat should be grounded in reasons and logical support and facts and figures and trends. And then we've also looked at the different modes where you can use yellow hat thinking to put an idea forward, to improve an idea, make it better, and finally to give a final assessment on your idea. I hope you liked this video on the yellow hat, and I'll see you in the next video on the green hat.